All right. Lily's on it. Good job, Lily. Today, we are joined by Reynolds Journalism Institute Innovation Fellows. What a great name for a fellowship. Kate B. Maxwell and Maria Arce. Also from RJI is she here? Hopefully the journalism track leader will be joining us, Emily Lytle. So if you like this session, you should definitely check out the community journalism sessions that are going to be taking place during the Radically Rural Summit, September 25th and 26th. Kate and Maria are here today to talk about disaster coverage in rural communities. I'll let them introduce themselves and get into today's roundtable. Take it away.
Hi, thanks so much. We were gonna do a little poll, but maybe we want to. I don't know if we want to deploy that now or wait until after we talk a little bit. I could do either way. So
we can launch the poll now so we know where everybody's coming from and what their experience is. Let me just go ahead and hit that. So we just have a couple questions like, what sector do you work in? Have you ever reported on a disaster? Just go ahead and click through them and then we'll show the results. Alrighty. Looks like everyone answered. You guys are quick today. And I'll share the results there, so you should be able to see them. It looks like we have a good chunk of journalists, other media folks, and something else. About 75% of people have reported on a disaster, and 100% of people have experienced one and felt it was challenging to find useful information.
Wow. I'm curious what the something else is. Is that person willing to share what industry or sector they're joining from?
Hi, my name is Becky Patel. I work at the Vermont Department of Health. I do emergency preparedness, and one of my colleagues sent this to me thinking how important this subject is. So that's why I joined today. Thanks.
Very cool. Happy to have you.
yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I think both Maria and I met during the RJI Innovation Fellowship and realized that we had both a lot of experiences in common, but we're also really interested in trying to support this kind of work and figure out resources and tools for journalists to help them serve communities and better collaborate. But we also both just came back from the Natural Hazards Research Annual Conference. And so we were talking to researchers and emergency practitioners. And one of the themes that I was really going to focus on today is trying to identify ways that local journalists and media can really collaborate with those different both local and statewide and federal stakeholders, so that we can kind of all improve our work and learn from each other to better serve these communities. So it's exciting to have a mix of different people. And I'm going to go ahead and just jump into a presentation. So for the purposes of this conversation, I know a lot of us are journalists here. I am going to sort of focus more on the kind of big ideas around why this work is important and sort of how to think about it in a larger information ecosystem, as opposed to sort of the in the weeds stuff that will be really specific for journalists. But happy to talk about that at length with anyone at any point in the future. So, but, I think just to make this kind of a broader conversation, I wanted to really focus more on sort of how journalists fit into the larger emergency preparation, response, recovery processes, and how we can really improve those relationships. So can everyone see my screen just really quick?
Yep. Yes, looks good.
Cool. So thanks again for joining us. I'm Kate. Maria will switch over to her presentation after I give a little overview. So, um, I first started working as a journalist in Mendocino County in 2014. I was working at a town-based sort of weekly paper that reached in a town of about 5,000 people.
It's so true.
And I was working for Alden Global Media, which is, one of the major national conglomerates that is really known for cutting back newsrooms. And so I was working for $1 over minimum wage. And the county is very large, very rural, has a lot of different microclimates. And so people were kind of living in these little information bubbles, and there was a lot of huge gaps. We had no TV station, we had one NPR affiliate. So everything from breaking news to the changing cannabis regulations to county government to the arts was not being covered. So me and another local journalist decided to start an online news outlet in 2016, and we were really hoping to start trying to figure out covering some of those gaps. But about a year into writing this news startup, we didn't have any funding. The Mendocino experienced the deadliest wildfire in county history. It was called the Redwood Complex, and it sort of started in the middle of the night in a huge regional windstorm. And pretty immediately, all the power and cell phone communications went out. The major highways were closed, and there was, little to no way to get good information about what was going on, where to evacuate, what was happening. So we really, as an online news source, had to kind of think on our toes, figure out where we could get to, that we could even make a phone call, where we could get to try and post something on the website. It took several days for power to be restored or for sort of anyone else to be able to get into the area. The local newspaper couldn't print because their printers were hundreds of miles away. It kind of threw everyone through a loop. But because we were able to be flexible, we were able to figure out ways to live stream the press conferences and translate things into Spanish and kind of provide breaking news as things changed in a way that hadn't currently been available in our area. And it made a huge difference in terms of trust, in terms of reaching people, and really changed the way we thought about how we were doing local news. So unfortunately, any of us that have lived through a major disaster knows it can take years to recover. But that was kind of just the first big deal fire to happen in our county. Since then, we're part of California's first million-acre fire, which encompassed a number of counties and went on for months. Mendocino has seen 3 of California's 5 largest wildfires in recorded history. We had outages that were countywide of more than 10 days, where we had to figure out, how to get off grid so that we could post information. And we're getting tips from people about who actually had what parts of the grid go back on and when. We have had basically 15 federal declared disasters since we started the Mendocino Voice, fires, floods, winter storms, COVID. But we have also had, years worth of drought. We've had a number of pretty dangerous heat waves. So all of these things have often been overlapping in the same communities that saw a previous fire, or when you had a dangerous fire, you now have increased flood risk and landslide issues. So it's really been something that we had to kind of start thinking about long term and think about how we were going to weave into our coverage overall. But we did that because, we just got so much feedback from readers everywhere saying, I haven't been able to find information like this. I don't, thank you so much. And what it also meant was we had people who started reading us for the fires, continued to read us for the government coverage, or, they were someone even from out of the area who was able to help find someone they cared about and get them information. And they decided to become a subscriber. We were able to really build engagement, trust, membership. And through that, we were able to kind of expand our reporting, build fire season sponsorships, really think from a publishing perspective about how to make this work and our operations sustainable so we could really be serving our readers with not only that breaking news, where do you evacuate, where's the FEMA deadline going to be able to be, but also to have environmental coverage that really looked at what are those bigger solutions that we can be doing in our area, the structural inequalities that are happening, really make that something that our readers are thinking about year round and that we're looking at both from an immediate event to kind of the whole community and how it will affect us years later. So, as many of the journalists will know, what has happened in Mendocino is not actually a unique situation, particularly in rural areas. So we have, the number of emergencies that are happening, the number of temperature records that are being broken, the frequency of those emergencies, the scale, unprecedented things happening in areas where historically they did not, the scale of damages, and then the potential for compounding, particularly climate-related disasters of just having COVID during a wildfire and having all of the power out at the same time. So I think that's something that unfortunately both Maria and I, and probably many of you, feel if you hadn't experienced, it's likely you will. And, it's definitely something that we are all likely to experience again. And so trying to keep that conversation going throughout the year and think in a more long-term way is really part of the hope of this project. But at the same time, journalism is facing similar disasters in the sense that the number of newsroom employment has been dropping extensively, particularly in those sort of legacy national chain papers. There have been really exciting things that digital first and community media and ethnic media and independent journalists and even community organizations are doing to try and fill those gaps, but they're really facing a lot of challenges, both in their own learning curves and having access to resources and training, and also figuring out, how to really best inform the public and answer their questions about these kind of complex issues that we need to look at. So, in particular, local journalists, which has really been my focus and the bulk of my work, can play a really important role in local communities. All the journalists here would know there's something called parachuting that can often happen and, is a big deal in a disaster situation where journalists from out of the area, from national outlets, will arrive and share stories. And in some ways that can be hugely valuable to get the word out to a broader community, but those stories don't often really reflect the understanding or the needs of the people who are actually living through that disaster. And, on top of that, they may not know the right people to talk to. They may not have the context and history. And the same thing happens on a disaster response level when people come in from out of the area and start sending out emergency alerts. They may often use the names of roads or certain evacuation zones that are things that local people may not understand, or it would be really helpful to have context for. So journalists have all of that background, have sources in place, or hopefully are looking for them, maybe know the different kinds of communities and how they're getting information that aren't being served by the paper or the radio, whether it's because they are too far away in a rural place or whether or not it's because of language barriers. They may also be able to just figure out what those questions are and pass them along to emergency response professionals, both the needs and saying, hey, people out there know that there's aid they can get, but no one seems to understand how to get through to someone on that telephone number. No one seems to understand exactly what the options are. Can you do an interview with me? So figuring out how to really work with local journalists and build that into kind of the disaster response network is really important. I think unfortunately, that's something that hasn't always been the case in terms of the relationships between local journalists and emergency response professionals. But in rural areas, so many people are playing local hats that I think there's actually a lot more capacity for people to make those connections because you are friends and neighbors year round. So, as part of our work, I'll just kind of run through this quickly. We did really thinking about things in before, during, and after sections of the kinds of roles and coverage that journalists can do. We started doing a lot of information and working with local nonprofits about how do you put together a go bag? How do you sign up for emergency notifications? What are the kinds of resources you might be able to access now so that your life is a little more stable if this kind of event comes along? We had a lot of experience with kind of going out into the emergency, figuring out how to provide on the ground verification of, is this road actually closed? No, the hospital is still open and here's the right number to call. Here are places that are offering free food, and having that kind of be an ongoing process, working with residents and readers and community agencies and members, everyone, to figure out how do we be flexible and get that information out in all the different ways we can. And then afterwards, local journalists are really there for the long haul, and community members. And so they are best positioned not only to kind of ask the hard questions about what grants are available, are they being applied for, are they being equitably distributed, are the contractors doing what they're supposed to, but also really follow up on what are solutions that have worked in similar places, and figure out creative ways that this community might be able to be more resilient for the next time. So out of this, I put together the local news go bag local news go bag project. Apologies for the dog. It is a combination of different things that is going to be evolving over time. So the website that exists right now has templates and tips and exercises, resources, and things that are really focused on helping support local journalists figure out whether or not they're trying to figure out what to do better the next time, or whether or not they have lots of experience but are trying to figure out more operational ways to support their work in terms of revenue or audience growth. The goal of that is to really have a simple place that people can find that information and also start connecting with each other. Whether or not that's, just kind of peer-to-peer support, or sharing tips about equipment, or figuring out collaborations to build guides to share with readers, particularly in rural places. My experience as both a journalist and publisher has been that it's very easy to kind of just be focused on the place right in front of you. And while that's great, it can also be isolating, and people are out there doing really amazing things that can be easily implemented in other places. And we should all be talking about more and sharing and learning from each other. So I'm also going to be holding a series of meetups to just have local journalists working on these issues chat more about those things in detail. But for the purposes of our time together today, I really wanted to emphasize thinking about creative, maybe unusual ways that you can start building collaborations, with the goal of really centering different diverse community members so that they can be informed, empowered, and actually be able to engage in these processes, to really strengthen the role of emergency planning overall in our communities. So, in a lot of times, my experience, I already knew the person who might be running the food bank, and that might be the exact same person who's also the person who is taking in highway members that don't know what to do because they were just tourists, and then suddenly a winter storm closed the road. And it was lucky that I had her cell phone number because we live in a town of 3,000. But, that is not often the case, or sometimes those relationships don't make it easier, but actually make it harder. And so looking at around and thinking, what are the nonprofits and what information are they trying to get out? And how can we really use our platform to let people know about these classes? And, what are the information that we need? How can we put together a flyer for people? Just beginning to think about those things more creatively and talking to people about what would be most useful to them, and starting to think through those things right now. Have been really huge in my experience to improve our work, both from the reporting side to serve the community, but also to be able to make sure we can be there for years moving forward as an organization that people do trust. A big part of that trust has also really been being open to hearing what questions people have, being open to hearing how, we didn't actually access any of that information because it wasn't clear, from what any of the organizations were saying. Being open to, making sure you're always making corrections and clearly explaining your process and telling people, this is what we do know. This is when we expect to have an update. This is how we're fact checking. All of that transparency and community engagement has really made a huge difference in terms of getting feedback from the community, getting tips, and then building organizational support and these kinds of information ecosystem partnerships. So, beyond that, I know everyone has sort of heard about these things, but it's really easy. I know even myself, I have not put together all the emergency equipment that I should, but there's a lot of things that are really easy to start doing now, to just kind of strengthen those ties and build that more resilient network. So if you haven't started to build those relationships with the different people involved in emergency response or the people in different parts of your community, that may serve as information hubs, starting to reach out and talking with them about ways to work together, really making sure that you have put together emergency plans for yourself and your workplace, for your friends and family who might be messaging you while you're trying to report on the emergency. Figuring out how you can put together materials in advance for your audience so that all those little decisions that are going to be a lot harder to make in a crisis, you've kind of tried to do what you can in advance. And then really, throughout the process, making sure that you're thinking through what is useful for different communities. Are you really focusing on the people who are feeling the most impact of the disaster? Or if that's something that you can't take on as a role, are you able to help connect them with people? If you want to tell the story to the broader world, what are the actions that you're helping connect your community with, through those stories, so that you're really serving everyone involved and thinking about how to improve things for the next time around. So, I would love to talk to everyone more about the details of this. I'm going to be holding a meetup in September, and so we'll be sharing that information coming up. But Maria's project is one that, is a really perfect example of how these collaborations can really create new, flexible, unique networks to serve communities. And so I'm excited to hand it over to her.
Thank you, Kate. I'm also going to share my screen. In a second, because I want to tell you a little bit more about who I am. I started covering natural disasters. Oh, wait. Sorry. Why is not allowing me to share this?
You just hit present next to share at the top
Oh,
there.
sorry. Thank you. Wrong button. So I started covering natural disasters in 2012. I was in New York. I was doing a training. I got caught by Hurricane Sandy. I had no idea how to cover a natural disaster. And that was my first. But I remember the first things that I did was to turn on my analog radio. And from that moment, radio became part of my courage all the time. until something happened in Puerto Rico in 2017. I was living there, and Hurricane Maria hit us. The level of devastation that Maria brought to the island was completely unexpected, and it was unprecedented, you know. So I was working as the digital director of two media outlets there, and I deployed 30 people all over the island in pairs, a reporter, a videographer, a reporter, a photographer. And little by little, I started to see how the cell phone signals were going off. I had no idea if they were okay, if they were alive, if they were dead, no idea, no information. Everything was a blackout. It took up to 7 days to know about my last video editor. He returned 7 days after the hurricane. And let me tell you that those were the most despairing days of my life, not knowing about my team, on top of all the coverage of the disaster that we were doing. So after we recovered, or started to recover, I started to think what we could do to keep communicated in the aftermath of a disaster if this is going to happen again. So while researching for another project, I came across with a lot of research about how amateur radio operators or ham radio operators were collaborating in relief efforts, how they were partnering with government officials, with emergency operations, with health departments, and even with local communities. But I was thinking, why no one is partnering with us, with reporters? So there are some specifics that I'm gonna explain now, but also because no one ever asked. So I asked several group of amateur radio volunteers, and they all said, yes, we are willing to work, we are willing to partner and help you in the aftermath of a natural disaster. So, but to learn what we could do, because there are very specific regulations by the Federal Communications Commission that we need to be in compliance, I needed time, I needed resources to see what we could do. So I applied to the RJI fellowship at the Reynold Journalism Institute at the University of Missouri, and they decided to support my project, knowing that unfortunately, you know, with climate change, we're going to have more and more natural disasters, and they're going to be more devastating. So that's how I started to build what I call ARENA, which stands for Amateur Radio Emergency Newsroom Alliance. And it's a toolkit that is designed to harness the power of amateur radio for reporters and newsrooms. But my toolkit is fully functional for anyone wanting to know how to become an amateur radio. So if you're not a reporter here today, you just skip the part that is specifically related to reporters, and you can still take advantage of this toolkit that I'm going to share in a bit with you. It's available in English and in Spanish. So my toolkit, I'm going to go through the basic things that my toolkit covered today because I don't have a lot of time. But there are a lot of more topics that the toolkit cover, especially thinking of reporters and newsrooms, because there are some specifics. I'm going to mention them. So basically, what ARENA covers is how to get the ham radio license or the amateur radio license. So we have two paths. Basically, one of them is getting the technician and general classes licenses that the FCC grants. To get those licenses, you need to take an exam. You need to answer 26 of 35 questions from a total of 100 questions. In my toolkit, I explain you how to find those 100 questions. They are public, they are available, there are websites, there are books, there are apps, there are a lot of things that you can use to take that exam. But let me tell you that you need to have some technical background. It is said that even a kid can take the exam. It's true, but you have to be a very smart kid, let me tell you, to pass the exam. But yes, anyone can do it. But sometimes, you know, you're going to need time to study, to pass this exam. So if you don't have time, or if you're like me, that you don't really like a lot of numbers and, you know, that scientific part, there's a plan B, which I found completely fascinating, and it's the GMRS license. The GMRS license stands for Global Mobile Radio Service. And this is a license that you only apply for it. There's no need to take any exam. The FCC will grant it almost immediately in the same day or the next day. You only need to pay is $35 for it's the fee for the license. It's the same fee for the other 2 licenses that I just mentioned. All license last 10 years. So if you think of it, it's very cheap, it's very affordable. The biggest difference between the general class, the technician class, and the GMRS license is the range of communication. So let's put it this way. Technician is for local communication. General, let's say it's for regional. And GMRS is for very local communication. So the range is between 5 and 25 miles for GMRS, but we still have repeaters and other ways to reach farther distances that I also explain in my toolkit. Also in my toolkit, I'll explain you how to start thinking of your first equipment. This is mine. Let me show it to you. It's a very small, we call them handy talkies. And it's like a walkie-talkie, basically. And they start at $19. They are super expensive. This one, it's a little bit more sophisticated, so it cost me around like $90, but it's very affordable. But you can get radio equipments that cost $14,000. So the range of prices are huge, but again, you need to start small, especially when you are giving your first steps in ham radio. So everything about the equipment is also covered in the guide, in the toolkit, batteries, antennas, all that is also covered there. Another section that I have in the toolkit, it's about the regulations. And something that I really like also about GMRS license is that, and for the other 2 license too, is that since 2007, there's no need to know Morse code. No need to Morse code. There's no jargon involved in GMRS broadcasting. You just use plain language. You just use your day-to-day language, and you don't have to learn the codes and some jargons that ham radio operators, technicians, and general class licensees need to know. So I think that's something that also is very helpful and very useful when implementing very quickly an alternative way of communication for journalists in the aftermath of a natural disaster, and also for rural communities. So I also explain you how to communicate, how to use radiograms. I'm going to show you one. A radiogram is a form that it is used, especially in the aftermath of natural disasters, when we are relying information that it's related with needs, like, for example, health needs. I'm going to explain you a little bit more about this, but it's very important to ensure accuracy in the messages, because messages go through one person to another, and until they meet their final destination, or the final person that it's waiting for that message. So these radiograms help us ensure accuracy. People read them out loud on the radio. Someone else on the other side of the state take a note and then read it back. So once we all know that the message is accurate, the other ham radio operator can pass it on, and that's the way it works, to avoid any kind of miscommunication. And I also encourage you in my toolkit to contact ham radio clubs, local ham radio clubs. They are all over the US. There are thousands of them. People who join the clubs are amazing people. They are super generous. They are willing to help, willing to collaborate with local communities, and also with journalists. And they do a lot of things. You can even sign what it's called the MO, a Memorandum of Understanding. This is something that is pretty standard that they do. They tend to sign these agreements to put in paper what are the expectations from them during a natural disaster. So these are the top things that I wanted to share with you. But there are other aspects that I also explain in the toolkit. It's pretty long, so please take a look at this. And for me, this is very important, because this tool will allow you to have a level of community engagement if everything fails, it's almost impossible to have. This is affordable. This is easy to use. The short distance between users minimize potential interference. So the communication can be constant. There's a rule that it's applied in the aftermath of natural disasters that is called the rule of 3, which is let's connect every 3 hours during 3 minutes on channel 3. This is a standard that that the ham radio operators are trying to implement all over the US, so people can keep in touch constantly and provide updates of what's going on in their local communities. And as I was saying, the only issue that you might face using GMRS license is that the range is shorter, but we also have repeaters that can help us. Repeaters are these towers that, as the name say, repeats the signal and the information that is being broadcast. So as for 2024, there are 155,000 GMRS licensees all over the US. So this is pretty popular. I know that we are many more people here, but still it's a community that is growing. And I encourage you to join the community. As you can see, it's easy to use, is also very cheap. Just keep in mind that the license that you will get, that's my license. It's a public license. It's a combination of numbers and letters that everyone can know, but there's no harm on it. So in the same way that when we are listen to a radio, we hear someone saying that you're listening to WQA4, well, you will have your own call sign. That number with that call sign with numbers and letters will be your personal ID. So something that I really also want to highlight today is that when there's an emergency, like a natural disaster, anyone can use your equipment to relay a message. Anyone. They don't have to have a license to do it. And I think this is something that it's beautiful in the sense that, democratize, the use of radio. If you only have a ham radio license, you can't share it with anybody. But with GMRS, yes, you can let your neighbor talk with someone, maybe, for example, if I were today in Puerto Rico after being hit by Storm Ernesto, and let's say that I don't have power, I don't have anything, I can go use my radio and contact a ham radio operator in Florida to let my godson know that I'm okay. And if a neighbor comes, I can also lend my radio and help him or she to do this, him or her to do the same. So I think that this is something also to keep in mind. And also keep in mind that anyone under your roof, if they live under your roof, they can also use your license. And this is with a GMRS license, okay? These are the kind of things that you can hear when you join the community. The most common thing is what it's called the welfare status, which is people trying to let others know that they are okay. The other thing is population status, when you hear people reporting that towns are isolated, that there are types of rescue that are needed. There's a lot of information. Ham radio operators become like the voice of the community, and you can have an ear on that community just by turning on your radio. You don't need to speak if you don't feel comfortable at the beginning, but at least you can get a lot of information. Assistance status that is needed, shelter, oasis, food banks, medicines, blood that is needed, all that kind of information, it's being broadcasted all the time, always in compliance with HIPAA law. This is very important. Remember that everything that is broadcasted is public, and anyone can listen to that as long as they have the license and the equipment to do it. So it's very important to be very careful on what you are saying on air, but also it's a resource of information which is very valuable for communities and also for journalists. And that I think that it's key, for example, to keep an eye on or an ear on the weather and environmental status. There's also a group of volunteers. They are called Skywarn Spotters. There are 400,000 all over the US. I'm a Skywarn Spotter. This means that we are trained to report on severe weather. We think that satellites can see everything. That's not the case. There are a lot of things that satellites can't see, and it's very important to have the voice of the local people telling us what's happening in their communities. So these are some kind of information that you can have access, and with reporters, it will help you, for example, to decide if you want to send someone to cover a specific community. If you know that this community is in need of XYZ, you can decide to change the coverage of your day and send someone else, someone to that different community. So this is the welfare radiogram. This is just an example of someone letting a relative know that it's in hospital, but it's okay. This is just for you to see it. It's not complicated. Usually what it's done is that people write messages in chunks of 25 words to keep them short and easy to fact check. So I invite you to get the license, contact ham radio clubs, ask for frequencies and equipment that work in your area. There are 30 frequencies that can be used for GMRS. I don't know which one is in working in your area, but that's something that the ham radio clubs can let you know. And at the beginning, you just need to listen on the air if you don't feel comfortable talking, but then practice, use the radiograms. Be sensitive and patient. This is very important. Be sensitive and patient, because a lot of people, if they know that you have this superpower, I call it a superpower, to be able to communicate when nothing else is working, they will reach out to you. So be patient, be sensitive, and try to help, to teach others and relay information for others. So just let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to help. My toolkit and everything related to it, it's free and will be free forever. That's my commitment with the RJI Institute, RJI and the RJI Fellowship. So if you need help with anything, just contact me and let's talk. Thank you.
Wow, that was incredible. Thank you both so much. One of the things we love about roundtables is that we provide open space and opportunity for folks to ask questions and provide input. So Kate and Maria, do you have some prepared questions? Or are you just holding open space for everyone?
We have a couple we can throw out at people, but I guess I also kind of want to open it up if anyone has a question to start with after the presentation before we throw questions at you.
Yeah, any doubt or anything else that you would like to learn about our project? Don't be shy, you're a journalist. Yes, Abby,
Should I turn on my camera?
if you want.
Okay, I will. Hi, sorry, I kind of arrived late, and my freaking audio was on, so I'm very sorry about that. But I think both of the work that you're doing, both of you, I mean, and everyone here, I just want to acknowledge, like, that's just so important, and it's kind of refreshing to think that other people are thinking about this too. Like, especially with journalism, we're often taught to kind of like stay on the sidelines and like just be observers, but I've never liked that. So I'm glad that there is like a direction towards solutions and like actually enabling people to protect each other than just like every man for himself. Um, I wanted to ask, I guess, how do you both of you get people to really care about this issue? Because I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I live in Athens, Ohio, and I am an AmeriCorps member, so I serve at a nonprofit. And we do a lot of environmental work, and we are constantly thinking about climate change and climate disaster and things like that. But it's a little difficult to get people to around the area who, are working like in the coal mines or working construction, and they're exhausted and they're focused on like the moment rather than the future. I guess, how does that like education extend to that demographic of people?
Can I start, Kate? Well, in my case, the project started in Puerto Rico, and unfortunately, but fortunately, in the sense that after the huge impact of Hurricane Maria that no one was expecting, no one saw this coming, people became more conscious about the need of readiness, about the need of preparedness. So at least in Puerto Rico, it's not that difficult for me because, you know, we have this like general conscious out there. But still, I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do, and we need to keep talking about. And, you know, being in roundtables like this, or in events, or, you know, sharing our toolkits with colleagues and presenting them in different forums, it will help us, you know, because unfortunately, I'd love to say this is not going to happen. As when I remember when I pitched my project to the RJI, I said, this is a tool that I don't want anyone to ever use. It's the only thing that I ever built that I don't want no one to use, because if they have to use it, it means that everything failed. So, you know, it's going to take time. There are people that are still denying climate change, and we still need to work on that. There's a lot of education that needs to be done, but being out there, sharing results. For example, I already trained 7 reporters from 2 different newsrooms in Puerto Rico that they have already implemented this toolkit. And there's a third newsroom that implemented by itself, just following my toolkit in Louisiana. And there's a 4th one in Florida that also wanted to do it. So little by little, I think that's, you know, the spreading them, even the mouth to mouth will help us. And I know that it could be like, and something that I didn't say is that arena in Spanish means sand. So this is like my grain of sand. And I see this work as the grain of sand that we have to put every day. And at some point we will have a beach. So I'm hoping that people like you and everybody here will help us spread the word.
I want to let Gracie talk, but I just want to add on to that really quick. I think, you know, my experience has also been in a place where once there was a major disaster, you know, there was at least people were kind of primed to want more information and had many questions and were very frightened. But I think, you know, one of the silver linings in some ways of having COVID start was, you know, I think all of the same kinds of systemic and structural issues that will mean that kind of already fragile and underserved communities are going to bear the brunt of emergencies even more, is sort of one way that you can start getting at those issues. And so it may be hard to convince people that they need to pack a go bag. But talking about, you know, what are the air quality issues? What are the public health infrastructure, or, you know, the food banks, or sort of are there mutual aid groups that are working on community issues year round that you might want to start connecting with? Is sort of one way to approach that. And I know I don't know if, say, for example, the East Palestine train accident, you know, I think there's, unfortunately, aside from COVID, which is kind of its own time scale, there's also, you know, a lot of these same kinds of thinking and templates and ways to reach out, engage with people, and also listen to people's questions are very applicable. You know, I think in an industrial accident, maybe in a school shooting, you know, I think these are kinds of events that are kind of crises for people, but can give us a window into maybe larger structural changes we want to, or long-term things we want to start changing, or different ways to just hear people's questions. I think also one of the big things that I think is a stumbling block is just people may know abstractly what they should be doing, but they're actually afraid to ask, I can't afford to build a go bag, or I don't know what I'm supposed to put in it. And so finding ways to start those conversations, to really hear what those gaps are and see how they could be filled, I think is one option too. Gracie, you should go.
Sure. So I wrote in the introduction about myself. I work for Access. We're a fairly large nonprofit for Southern Oregon, which is a region of small towns. And we had the Alameda fire, and unfortunately, our area is plagued by fires yearly in the summer. And the Alameda fire took out multiple towns, our downtowns even. We lost upwards of 3,000 buildings in that fire. And right now, we are in a long-term recovery situation. We're rehousing many of those people, and we still have fires. And I think there is still a lack of communication. And we've looked into ham radios as a means of communication because when we have a fire breakout in a region, we just had one actually a month ago that broke out in the Applegate Valley, a little bit over the hill from us. And the power was cut off because of the dangerous situation that could happen if they didn't cut the power off. So power was cut off early. There's no cell service out there in that region. And there was just no way to get communication in or out. And there were many people who didn't know they had to evacuate because they didn't have any way of figuring that out. And I think we all want to go in the direction of using ham radios, but at the same time, what we're facing now is how do we get the rest of the community that isn't involved in communications or in nonprofits and long-term recovery groups that we have here, or journalism, how do we get the general community to get those messages? And how do we, because that's who we're trying to help. And I think that if we can only talk to each other, that's one thing, but if we can't talk to them, then how do we go about that?
Yes, and it's very interesting. I have an example from Puerto Rico. You can contact what is called the ARES or the RACES teams. The ARES is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. It's a group of volunteers. RACES stands for Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services. These are groups of amateur radios that operators that are volunteers, and they are very well organized. They usually get in touch with the communities, and the idea is that when you are not experiencing the natural disasters, is that you go proactively to these communities and show them the benefits. I mean, it doesn't have to be that everyone has to have a radio, but at least to have one person with equipment. And I can give you an example. This was in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. There was a town, they were all okay, but they were isolated because there were huge trees blocking the roads. And they needed just a bulldozer to clean the area, and all the problems would be solved. And so, but fortunately, there was someone with a ham radio station that was able to relay the message, and someone at some point got the message, came to the community, removed the trees, and the community was able to get water, to get the assistance and everything that they were in need. So sometimes showing examples of things that are being done in other regions, in other locations, how does it work? You can also ask the ham radio clubs to contact, and also I can help you to contact people in other areas where you can share their testimonies and show them how useful is this. That's I mean, I think what I had seen, and in one of the pictures of my presentation, there's a group of people taking notes. That's a meeting that a group of volunteers organized in Puerto Rico, explaining the community how important it is for them to have ham radio. And 3 people in the moment, because it's very easy, apply for the GMRS license. It's just, it takes 10 minutes and you get the license immediately, and you just order your radio and you start. So showing them that it's easy, that it's affordable, and that there's no need of learning jargons or codes. I think that will be very helpful to convince them, because sometimes people think that they need to go to the university or take months of classes. in some cases, well, depending on how high you want to go with the license, if you want to get like the top license that allows you to contact, the International Space Station, which is true, well, it will take a lot of time, but you don't need that. So showing them that it's easy, that's affordable, and showing cases of success, I think will help you.
Yeah. I guess also just to add to that from just the reaching the people perspective, I think my experience in Mendocino was that, there were maybe 5 full-time reporters in the whole county. And so we, collaborating with other journalists in ways that worked was always essential. But also just accepting that people get information in a million different ways and sort of finding those trusted nodes. I can't expect everyone to want to go subscribe to or we didn't actually have a paywall. So support the Mendocino Voice, read the Mendocino Voice. Being free was a very important part of our mission in terms of all of this, actually. But whether or not I know news outlets have collaborated with the local food bank to say, when when you come every week, we have a flyer for you that both has a number where you can ask questions, text questions to, but also just has some basic information about where you can, get backup power banks or whatever, or here's how to get weather updates or sign up for emergency notifications. So I think finding those ways that people in your community, who they trust, and how you can collaborate with them, and really just meeting people where they're at and saying, you don't have to go on Twitter to get the NWS thing. We will help set up an SMS thing. We will find a way that, we're already building trust with you so that when you do have these important questions or there's things you need to know, you don't have to go too far for it. So I think that's also really important, of just kind of starting with where the people are that you want to reach. We also did farmers markets with tables, all the things, and just kind of saying, okay, everyone's got their own way of getting information. How can we be as flexible as we can and build relationships to make those connections easier?
And if I can add very quickly, also partnering with local leaders, religious groups, NGOs, people that are trusted in the community that can help you organize these kind of like mini events where you can explain the benefits and how this will, help the community to become safer and more reliable, in the sense that, they can trust each other, they can help each other, they can support each other.
Thank you both so very, very much. We have loved having you. Maria, looking through that guide was just amazing. We're going to put it on our Radically Rural website in our resources, because I think the more communities that can implement that, the better. And thank you all for joining. I hope that we will see you in September at the summit, because we have incredible conversations like this for multiple days in a row. So yeah, thank you again. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you so much.
Kate. Thank you, Maria. Bye.
Thank you.